I've just started working in my round journal. I don't know why, but I really wanted to have a round journal. So I made one myself, and this was sort of the prototype. So I've been thinking of all sorts of things. This was based on that wonderful song, The Windmills of Your Mind. This spread was based around thinking about round and round the garden, the children's rhyme, and I put a lovely grizzly rather than a teddy bear. And really, that's about as far as I've got. There are a few extra things in here. I was just practicing doing image transfers and put these bears on. And I have gone through my journal and sort of stuck some background papers on because I made this in such a hurry, and I say it is a prototype, that some of the pages were falling out already. So I've just used some background papers to hold it all together. As I was thinking of round things, I came across this image of a dragon swallowing its own tail, and I was like, oh, love that. I'd love to do a spread with an image transfer of this. And then, of course, I started thinking, oh, it's Chinese New Year ever so soon, and it's going to be the year of the dragon. And I started looking at some Chinese dragons and images. All these images are from Pixabay, by the way, and those are royalty free, so no concern about copyright. So, to celebrate the year of the dragon, I'm going to do a round journal entry with this gorgeous image. I have decided that I will do it on this page. So I've just used, this is craft paper, just brown wrapping paper that I did stick on the page because, say, it's all falling to pieces a bit and I needed to keep it together. And my idea, if I just scribble, so I've got my round journal, and I thought I would put my round snake slightly going off to give that sense of movement, and the head is going to be kind of here with its tail, and the body will be going off, and that will give me space to do other things and have a play. When I'm journaling, usually I don't start with a great plan. Wanted to practice doing my image transfer, and I'd seen that one, so this time I have, and hey, it's my journal, so I'm allowed to do what I fancy. I have printed the snake out, and I've used a laserjet printer, and I reversed it because when you stick it down, it is reversed, and I think the placement will be something like that. Now, having looked at other images, the whiskers are fantastic and the horns are fantastic on Chinese dragons. This one is a bit underwhelming, so I'm going to doodle on top of this when it's transferred and give it good long whiskers, and I might actually give it a leg as well, because again, this hasn't got legs and I really like the legs and the claws on Chinese dragons. I can make that decision later. Probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, my lovely sister gave me a little pack of scraps of oriental paper, and it's been sitting in my cupboard for ever since, and I thought, oh, I can use these. So I've selected out ones with gold and red because when I see Chinese celebrations, gold and red is so predominant. Oh, and I found, there you go, Liz and Ian, we were invited to a friend's party and I loved the gold envelope, so I thought, oh, I can use that. If you haven't got red and gold beautiful pattern papers, I just happen to be lucky that I have, improvise. So it could be a gold envelope, it could be a bit of wrapping paper. My lovely dragon is going to go kind of here-ish, and I want to frame it with some of those craft papers. And I was thinking of almost like an L shape or an offset, something quite square to play against the circle of the dragon and the circle of the book. So I wondered about tearing off strips of paper. I'm hoping it will tear nicely against the straight of the ruler. Yes, it has, apart from that bottom bit, but I can always trim that. I think a torn edge, even if it's a straight torn edge like that, is just a little bit more organic and interesting than a cut edge. My aim is usually to be perfectly imperfect. I'm nervous of tearing this one just because it's such beautiful paper and I don't want to muck it up. I fold it. Will that help the tearing? And because I'm doing an image transfer, some of this red will glow through his body. I'm going to leave this area quite clear because I want to be able to do the whiskers and the horns and make them stand out. You've got a vague plan. Take a photo before you move your collage if you've done quite a complicated setup, simply because you will entirely forget what you've done. I'm just going to use some PVA glue to stick my papers down. Use matte gel medium if you want. You could use a glue stick. I'm just going to get this down. Be generous with your glue because this is your foundation layer, and if this all falls to pieces when you're working on it, which way up do we want that? Maybe that way up. It will be deeply annoying. If you're concerned about getting glue on previous pages, just pop a sheet of old paper underneath like that, and that will make sure you don't stick all the pages of your journal together. Working in a homemade journal, I do like to try and glue across the fold just to reinforce the seam of my journal as well. Again, if you've got thin bits of paper that are going to be hard to glue on, just get a scrap piece of paper, glue on that, and you will be fine. Over there. Don't worry about overhangs, because what we can do is when it's dry is just go back in and trim that off. If you put it down wrong, as long as it's still wet, you can get it up. Certain papers do become quite fragile when they're wet. Luckily, not these ones. I wanted that gold to actually go under it. So try and squish out any wrinkles you've got, but don't get overly worried about it, because this is just a lovely way of adding texture. Right, when you're happy with your collage and the position, and don't worry because you can always go back in and add more, I want to seal it because some of these papers are quite delicate. So I'm going to use clear gesso, which is a primer. It is clear. You usually get white gesso, black gesso, clear gesso. Obviously, if I put white on this, it would cover up these gorgeous patterns, which I certainly don't want. Tears the paper for being painted on, it seals it. Now we are going to put our dragon on top. So I don't want to damage these papers when I'm rubbing off my image transfer. So just a standard brush, and I'm going to put that over the top, which will also help seal down some of those edges. This now needs to dry. You can hair dryer it if you want, or leave it to dry naturally while you're doing something else. Once it's dry, good idea to take this opportunity to trim off the excess. I am going to cut the excess off because I'm working in a circular journal. if you're working in a square, you could rip it if you like the look of a ripped edge, or indeed you could just leave those overhangs. That can look really good just with all the overhangs, if that's part of your sort of aesthetic and you like that. Just be aware, of course, by the time you've filled an entire journal, there's going to be a lot of overhang. So the easiest thing is to go from the back and just trim. So there's my background collage, and do you know, I really like that. Now we have our dragon, and we are going to put him sort of there. Do an image transfer. The idea, you stick it face down, so if you need to reverse your image, if it has a right and a wrong way, particularly say with writing, obviously you need to reverse it, then print it out. We stick it face down. I have always had the most success using matte gel medium to stick my image down. Other people use Mod Podge or PVA glue. What you mustn't use is washable PVA glue, because we're going to stick this down, let it dry totally, and then wet it and rub off the paper, just leaving the ink in place. And obviously, if it was washable, it's going to potentially dissolve. Because we are rubbing off the paper, I would suggest trimming your image as close in as possible, because it gives you less work to do. But do go careful with small bits, because the danger is you'll lose them in the process. And just to prove that, he should have some little whiskery bits here, and I managed to cut them off. Very foolish of me, but don't worry, we can sort that out. So I will show you how to do that. Grab a piece of paper, and do remember you're putting the glue on the print side. I only say that because every so often I'm automatically putting the glue on the back side, and we want to not get any glue, any matte medium on the back side, because that will seal the paper and make it harder to remove. And I will go from the middle outwards to decrease the likelihood of me getting matte medium on the other side. I'm holding it in place and I'm being generous, but not silly, because you don't want big splodges of matte medium, because we're going to really press this down onto our journal and it will ooze out if you have put too much in place. With all your brushes, whether you've used glue, gesso, matte medium, make sure you wash them afterwards. And I'm going to get this nice and flat. So I'm just gently putting it in place with my fingers, making sure there's no nasty wrinkles. And then we need to really make sure it's firmly in place. And I simply like to use an old store card, credit card. Be careful, because as that paper gets wet, it's only printer paper, it's nothing posh, then potentially again it gets quite fragile and it may start to come off. If as you do this you squish any glue out and it comes on the back of your card, wipe it off before you do it again, because say we don't want to get glue on the back of this paper. We're going to wet this and rub it down. Use a teaspoon, the back of a teaspoon, and just rub it all over. That's another possibility. I'm happy that it is totally flat, no air bubbles, it's all sealed down. We need to let this dry. Again, you can use a hairdryer if you want, or just let it dry naturally while you get on with something else. It's going to take at least a couple of hours. Overnight is even better. With the image transfer dry, just trim off any excess, and then you need to wet the back of the transfer. Use a little spray bottle or just use your fingers. I would do a section at a time if it's quite a big transfer. Let that water sink in and you'll start to see the image coming through. Now, gently rub the back of the paper and you'll get these little bits of sort of papier-mâché coming off. That's the back layer of the paper coming off. Do it gently because you don't want to lift the ink. It's about this point when I realised that I should have left mine to dry a lot longer. I was very naughty and I left it an hour over lunch because I was really impatient to rub it off. You need to be patient, you need to be gentle, and just work systematically to rub off as much of that as you can. When you've rubbed off most of the first layer, you will see that there's still sort of a cloud of paper slightly obscuring the ink. So you're going to then wet that again and gently rub it off until you get as much off as possible. If you start to lift the actual ink and that starts to rub off, you are going to have to stop at that point or just go even more gently. That's what I'm doing here, and it's at this point that I realise that I've got a bit of a problem, particularly around its head and tail, because some of that actually just lifted off, and I think the issue is that I hadn't actually dried it for long enough. It might have been that the papers were a little bit shiny underneath, even though I had put gesso on them. I don't know, but I was not going to panic, and I'll come back in with a pen afterwards and just touch it all up. If you're not sure that you've got all the paper off, you can let it dry, and then that film of extra paper becomes a lot more obvious. Say it'll look almost cloudy. So at that point, you just dampen it down, remove some more, or if you're really worried that you're going to get rid of the ink, stop at that point and let it dry. I'll show you what to do that we can slightly make that paper more transparent by coating it again with some more matte gel, and I'll do that in a moment. You can see that I'm going very gently and slower because this is the danger period, and you will be really upset if you've just been a bit gung-ho and the whole thing falls to pieces at this point. When you're finished, you'll end up with something like this. And if I keep my hand here, it doesn't look too bad, but you'll see I've had a total disaster over here, managed to rub off half its head and tail. So I may retitle this film, rather than all about doing a journal entry with me, it might be what to do when it goes wrong. Now you'll see there's still a film in place and we can't get any more off. So what we do is put another little layer of the matte gel over the top, and it just makes it more transparent and will bring out the blackness. The reason I've had so many problems, I think, is because I didn't let it dry fully. But to say, in a second, I'll show you what to do, and I'm sure by the time I've finished it will be fine. So I am going to grab a fine liner. So a fine liner has got waterproof and fade proof ink in it, and what we can do is basically touch up our transfer. So I'm looking here, all its poor snout that I managed to rub off, and it's all important teeth. I'm just going to mark back in, and it will be like it never went. So say lost a lot of its tail. You might even be able to find a brush pen that's also got this pigment ink in, and that would be even quicker to do. And if you haven't got a pen, then just use ordinary Indian ink, and you would be able to, and a fine brush, and you can just touch it up. And look, it's got a tail again. No one need ever know. The horns on this one are so much nicer. So I want to basically extend the horns. I say I would have done this even if it had been a perfect transfer. And for example, I would extend this round the back as well. So I'm going to make the ribs along its back a bit more interesting, like this dragon. I'm not going to put the leg in. I thought I was, but I'm not. And then I want to put the long whiskers that Chinese dragons always have coming from their snout. Well, that looks better, doesn't it? He's got his tail back. Poor thing. I fancy a little more gold, and what I'm going to use to add gold is aqua bronze. Now, I've had to decant it into a different pot because I broke the lid, but aqua bronze is basically a wonderful gold powder that already has a binder added to it. When you add a little water, you can make it into a paste or an ink, or you can sprinkle it into a damp wash. And I am thinking that I would like to put some gold dots here and a few behind him here, just to bring out the opulence of him. Short flat brush. I put some powder in the lid, and then I'm going to mix it with water so it's already got binder in it, and it makes a really gorgeous gold, very lustrous ink. Now, I need to do this pretty thick because I'm going to use a stencil to put the dots on. If you were doing your dots freehand, then you could have it a lot thinner. Usually when I stencil, I sort of do a stippling motion to really make sure it doesn't go under the stencil. And then I want a few more, but up here I think they will go behind him rather than in front. And I'm loving that gold highlight so much that while they're drying, just get a fine brush and let's give it a few gold highlights along his whiskers, maybe up its horns. And I'm just looking and seeing, of course, we've got this beautiful gold in this red here. We could carry on those little gold marks, which are rather fun, aren't they? That's why I love working like this, because that hadn't occurred to me until I looked at what was going on and thinking, oh yeah, I've got gold there, I could carry it on. And that's great fun. So you could use some gold ink if you've got a gold pen, a gold marker, a little bit of gold watercolour, a bit of gold acrylic. That would all work as well. And I just feel, with that dry and looking at it, that I would like a couple of black lines in places, I don't know, just to bring the black of the dragon into the background. And I think the best way to do that might be with a stamp. Now, I don't want flowers on it, though I was thinking maybe to pick up some of that flower mark, but I do really like the mark of the stems, so I will use that. So if you don't know these sort of little silicone stamps, they just go on the acrylic block and sort of self-stick. You can ink them up And then I am going to just use the stems to add a certain sort of mark like that. Now it's fine at the edge, but say I wanted to do a mark more in the middle and didn't want the flowers, I can just use a bit of paper to make sure that doesn't print. See, I think those look like dragon claw marks. Like it's been going, yeah, I like that. So you can always end up being a little bit, well, creative with the materials that you've got. Just use the end of that. Because when you're doing this sort of journaling and you're looking at tutorials or whatever, you're never going to have everything that the artist you're watching has got. You could have everything in the world and you'd still not have enough. So learning how to improvise and sort of get creative with the stuff you have got, I think is quite a key skill. So there you go. I think that is done. I've used that collage of those lovely oriental papers I found, but I also just used some scrap paper from an envelope. Then I did the image transfer, which was not perfect, and so you can take that as a lesson in how not to do it. I really should have left it a lot longer. Just like I said, leave it overnight. I didn't. I used a hairdryer. I only left it for probably an hour, and I should have left it longer, so a lot came off, but we saw that we could easily rectify it by going back in with the pigment liner, and I don't think you'd know now that it had quite such a disaster. And actually it was great fun to then bring some of the marks further out. I then added a few little gold marks, got a little carried away having seen the gold in the paper and thinking, oh, I'll bring that out. Marks in the dragon, and then I've mucked it up with my dragon claws, improvising and using the materials I had to get the sorts of marks I wanted. You enjoyed that, and happy Chinese New Year to you.